Hello everyone and welcome to another Stargate lore video. Today we're going to be talking about the Langarans.
What, so now you want to go to war? My friends are trying to save your world and you want to destroy it?
Oh, save your breath, Daniel. You folks are done.
History. The history of the Langarans started about 3,000 years ago when a ghoul named Thanos had occupied the planet and brought human slaves to the world. At some point he began to experiment with Naquadria and found a way to turn into a more powerful variant called Naquadria, though it's unclear if this was a discovery by the ghoul or ancients. Regardless, he found a way to turn raw Naquadria in the ground into Naquadria. However, 2,000 years ago, one of these experiments resulted in a massive explosion which nearly caused the planet's destruction and killed him in the process. Between then and first contact with Earth, we know three major countries had formed: Kelowna, Terrania, and the Yandari Federation, who all developed a deep mistrust and hatred between one another. We only really get passing comments as to why, such as a time when Terrania had occupied Yandara, which resulted in mass arrests and executions in response to terrorist actions against civilians, and something about Kelowna propaganda which resulted in many not trusting their word. We know by Earth's calendar in 1982 there was a major war between the nations, though we don't know much about it. The only thing we do know is it ended with none of the grievances that started the war being settled. The Stargate was found by Kelowna, but they didn't know what it was, and it just sat in their possession for about 15 years before Stargate Command dialed them in 2002. Initially, relations seemed good between the two, as Earth could offer Kelowna advanced technology, and Earth would have access to Naquadria, which some believe could be the key to unlocking more advanced technology, such as hyperspace transport. But there was a small issue that Kelowna was using the Naquadria to make a bomb that was way more powerful than Earth's own Naquadria-enhanced nuclear warheads. This became a big issue when Daniel was hit with a lethal dose of radiation, and according to the Kelownan government, Daniel had attempted to destroy the bomb, and asked that he be returned to Kelowna to face justice if he survived the radiation, and well...
The nausea will be followed by tremors, convulsions, and something called ataxia. Surface tissue, brain tissue, and internal organs will inflame and degrade. I believe that's called necrosis. And based on the dose of radiation I got, all that will happen in the next 10 to 15 hours. And if I don't drown in my own blood and fluids first, I will bleed to death, and there is no medical treatment to prevent that.
Yeah, that wasn't going to happen. In reality, what happened was that the Kelownan scientists had made an error and Daniel had prevented the bomb from going off. But the scientists didn't want to admit their mistake and blamed Daniel. Stargate Command had withdrew communications with Kelowna after Daniel had died/ascended, though not before Jonas Quinn, one of the top researchers for the project, had defected to them, bringing a small amount of Naquadria with him, and later becoming the fourth member of SG-1. He did this because he was moved by Jack and Daniel's words and saw the reality of how devastating the bomb could be, and he hoped Earth would be able to create better defensive technologies like shields. Later, Kelowna tried to re-establish contact as Terrania and the Yandari Federation were planning to sign a non-aggression pact and pull a Germany-Soviet thing against Kelowna. Who would be Poland in this situation? We would later learn this is because both countries had learned into the research about the bomb. Kelowna wanted to trade their Naquadria with Earth in exchange for military advancements, as they believed that if they stuck to conventional weapons, they would lose the war within 6 months, unless they had help from Earth or use the bomb. But Earth was only willing to trade in medical technology. At this time, Earth was also looking into the possibility of a group of rebels who they were told by one of the chief scientists, Dr. Kieran, who were planning on launching a coup against Kelowna. Unfortunately, it turned out that Dr. Kieran was suffering from schizophrenia as a result of being exposed to the radiation from the Naquadria, and had hallucinated the whole resistance. Ultimately, Earth left as they didn't want to trade any of their technology in fear of a repeat with the Urandans. And shortly after, war broke out, with the Terranians and Yandari beginning airstrikes against Kelowna, which forced them to move the Stargate into an underground bunker, and ultimately they did end up using the bomb. However, they did regret using it as its destructive power was just so great, though it did force the other countries to come to the negotiating table. Representatives from Terrania and Yandara had just arrived in Kelowna when Anubis showed up. Anubis had captured Jonas during an attempt by Earth, the Tok'ra, and Goa'uld to kill him and destroy his superweapon. Anubis survived, but his ship was heavily damaged. But after probing Jonas's mind, he found out about the Naquadria and came to Langara. He attacked Kelowna and killed off most of its leaders until they handed over all their Naquadria. Kelowna had made contact with Earth asking for help, and though they agreed, they ultimately had to bring in the other two nations and inform them about the Stargate. Ultimately, Anubis was defeated and his ship destroyed, though he survived. The three superpowers of Langara would form the Joint Ruling Council. Think of it like the UN for Langara. However, Tenaria and the Andari only agreed to do this if Jonas would represent Kelowna.
Cut your hair!
Sometime after this, they would actually name the planet Langara.
It was chosen by committee.
The word coming from a shared language between all three nations. Despite this move towards peace, the three nations would still mistrust each other, as was shown in 2003 when their world faced destruction. As it turned out, when Kelowna was testing their bomb, they caused a chain reaction that was turning all the Naquadria on the planet into Naquadria. And due to its unstable nature in combination with the heat and pressure, this would cause a massive explosion that would leave the planet uninhabitable. Two plans were formed. The first was to drill down to a fault line and detonate a nuke that would stop the conversion process of all the Naquadria on the planet. The second was to try and relocate as many people as they could to another world. Unfortunately, both plans would have problems. One of the chief designers of the drill and Jonas's girlfriend, Kiana, turned out to be controlled by a Goa'uld sent by Baal to find out why Anubis had been so interested in the planet. As for the relocation plan, the delegates on Earth spent most of their time fighting with each other and Earth over almost every issue. For example, when Stargate Command suggested moving people to Mandrona, the Andari representatives suggested they move to an uninhabited planet, or possibly three, one for each country. Or when they needed to decide who to send, each country wanted their own selection process. And even the threat of war was thrown out at one point. In the end, Jack told the delegates that Earth had had enough of their shenanigans and they would not help them evacuate. They would be allowed to stay until they heard back from the drill, but if it didn't work, they would be on their own. With Hammond confirming this, and I just love the looks they give here.
Now you fucked up! Now you fucked up! Now you fucked up! You have fucked up now! Now you fucked up! 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 Now you have fucked up!
Thankfully for them, the drill plan ultimately worked, with the Goa'uld spy actually giving her life to make the plan work. In the aftermath, the countries realized they really needed to start working together. Unfortunately, despite this newfound unity, they would find themselves unable to stand up to the Ori, who would invade and conquer the planet in 2006 after the destruction of the Jakara superweapon, though they would reclaim their independence after the Arc of Truth. At some point between then and 2010, they formed a true united government, though we don't know what the name of this government is or if it's a continuation of the Joint Ruling Council. They would also find themselves stuck between the two superpowers of the galaxy, Earth and the Lucian Alliance, as the Langarans had built a power station that tapped directly into the Naquadria-rich core of their planet and moved the Stargate to that facility. Earth wanted to use the Langaran Gate to dial the Destiny, as their world was one of the few worlds which had the ability to do this. But the leaders of Langara knew what had happened to the last two planets that tried to dial the 9th chevron. Stargate Command tried to have Rodney McKay show them his new dialing method he had created, which would not destroy the planet, but they refused to listen to it until their own scientists could look over it, which Rodney said would take them months to even understand the science behind it. What made the situation even worse was that there was evidence that the Langarans were in contact with the Lucian Alliance through the spy satellites Earth had placed in orbit of Langara, and they believed they were going to let the Alliance use the gate to dial Destiny. So the Destiny crew and Homeworld Command had come up with a plan with two goals in mind. The first was to use the ancient communication stones to take over the bodies of key personnel at the Langaran facility and force the gate to dial Destiny. The second was to find evidence that the Langarans were working with the Alliance. Unfortunately, while the team did find the two in more communication, they found that Langara had refused the Alliance's growing offers as they didn't want to risk their alliance with Earth. Ultimately, the plan was stopped when the Langarans realized what was going on, and while the dialing was stopped, Rodney did say that it was going to work. In the aftermath of this diplomatic disaster, Earth had to pledge to protect Langara from any attacks by the Lucian Alliance, and they moved their Stargate away from the facility to prevent anyone from trying something like this. Biology. Biologically, the Langarans appear very much human to their Earth cousins. In fact, I wasn't even going to make this section until I remembered something. During the events of the episode Metamorphosis, SG-1 had been captured by Naquadria, who was performing gene-altering experiments on humans. When she scanned Jonas, she noted he was different from the other humans, and when he confirmed that his ancestors were moved to another planet, she said this.
Those few thousand years on another world have changed you more than you know.
This indicates two things. One is that while the Langarans appear human, it's possible that deep down there's some genetic drift between them and the humans from Earth. Second is that Jonas is different in some way. Even Anubis commented on this at some point. He seems to have a higher intelligence and memorization skills compared to others. Even other Langarans, it would appear sometimes. So I think it's possible that Jonas is a step in the evolutionary branch of humanity, similar to Jack.
But I thought I was advanced.
Factions. The Langarans were made up of three main factions: Kelowna, Triana, and the Andari Federation. We sadly really don't know how each faction governed themselves. With Kelowna, we know the head of their government was a first minister, and they had a legislative body called the High Council. I should note that only Andara has an official name that indicates what type of government they have, a federation, while Kelowna and Triana do not. Though this does happen in the real world, like Canada and Japan's official names are Canada and Japan, while a country like Germany's official name is the Federal Republic of Germany. So I can't get too angry at the writers for not giving them official names. However, the fandom pages do claim that Kelowna and Triana are a republic and confederacy respectively, but I don't really know where they're getting this from. I saw this before I rewatched every episode the Langarans show up in, and I do not remember this being stated. If it is true, we can assume that they are a republic and confederacy. As for the Joint Ruling Council, as I said, it functions similarly to the United Nations, and after the Ori invasion, we get an indication that they have formed a true united government, but we only ever hear it referred to as the Langaran government, and again, it's unclear if this is a continuation of the Joint Ruling Council. I should also note for factions is sometimes the wording is a bit weird. I don't know if it's just me, but sometimes the wording to me indicates that while Kelowna, Terrania, and the Andari Federation are the superpowers, they aren't the only nations on the planet. Think of it like if an alien race were to come to Earth and they only talk to the permanent members of the Security Council and no other nation. However, like I said, it could just be me hearing this, and I think by the end of Langarian's story, it's pretty obvious these three nations are the only nations. Society. For society, we can't really glean much from them. I was going to do something where I tried to look at the clothing of the Langarians. For example, I noticed that the Terranian ambassador here wears very bright clothing that gives me this feel of royalty compared to everyone else in the room. And I thought this might give us a gleam into their culture, but their counselor wears very dark clothes that looks like something a politician would wear from the modern day. The only concrete thing I can glean from the societies of these three factions is they had a deep distrust and hatred of one another due to a variety of grievances. I did want to comment on something I think is rather odd, that being xenophobia. Now, place yourself in the footing of a Langaran citizen. Your world has been invaded twice by aliens, and if you're someone who's in the know, you're aware of the various minor incursions by aliens, or the fact that aliens have meddled in your planet's history. Wouldn't that lead you to have some mistrust of aliens? I bring this up as it would make sense that some xenophobia has developed, but as far as I can tell, it hasn't. Of course, we only ever deal with politicians, scientists, and military officials from Langara. We never really get to interact with citizens who aren't privy to all this knowledge. All they know is that aliens have come to their world and have threatened them. Technology. Technologically, the Langarans, or at least Kelowna, were somewhere close to where Earth was in the 1940s, though there were some things Earth had that they did not. such as advanced jet propulsions, and at least the case of Kelowna again, antibiotics, and racing cars for some reason. The only two technologies unique to Langara, specifically the Colonians, was their Naquadria bomb and the big drill they made, although it's possible Earth could make the same drill if they really wanted. Relations with other races. The relations of the Langarans are complicated. Starting off, none of the three major powers liked each other very much, and Kelowna had a bit of a rocky relationship with Earth, going back and forth between possible ally and annoying neighbor. Even when the Langarans united, they would still have somewhat of a rocky relationship with Earth. Sometimes it was because the Langarans wouldn't really unite and work together, and other times it was because Earth tried to pressure into doing things they didn't want to do. For the Goa'uld, they would obviously have hostile relations, even when a Colonian official tried to make out a deal with them. That didn't really work out. This also probably led to some tensions with the Jaffa later, but we never really hear about this. There would also probably be hostile relations with the Ori, and those humans who serve the Ori. With the Alliance, while they did turn them down, they seemed to want to keep it as nice as possible, probably because they realized the threat the Alliance would pose if they really wanted to push the issue. The only other group they may have had some relations with were the Maldronans, as their world was the one suggested to move any refugees in case Langara ended up exploding. However, it's not clear if the two groups ever met, and it seems like Earth was the middleman. However, I have to imagine this would have left a good impression of the Maldronans on the Langarians. Fun facts. For fun facts I found 3. The first is that according to the Stargate role-playing game, Langara has 2 moons. Peros, which is only visible during the day, and Valor, which is only visible in the southern hemisphere. The second is that Kelowna and Langara are actually names for real-world places. Langara is a community in Vancouver in British Columbia, which is situated around Langara College. Kelowna is the name of a real-life city in British Columbia. And in the Stargate novel, Survival of the Fittest, when SG-1 learned that they were going to Kelowna, the country on Langara, they joked they were going to Kelowna, British Columbia. Finally, there was a mission to Kelowna in the unmade video game Stargate SG-1 The Alliance, where Kelowna was going to be invaded by the Goa'uld. The footage you see here is actually from someone who got their hands on an unfinished version of the game. And that was the Langarans, and I honestly think this is my favorite group of humans in the Milky Way galaxy besides the Tau'ri. My reason why is basically has to do something that Stargate encompasses. See, one of the cool things about Stargate as a series is you get to see the sort of building up of Earth as an interstellar nation. Granted, it hasn't happened yet by the end, but in the first season, Earth goes from being, well, our Earth, to being one of the most dominant powers in the Milky Way galaxy, and arguably even Pegasus. And what I like about the Langarans is they're like that, but on a micro scale. When we first see them, they're a nation of feuding states, but by the end they become a true united government, and if the series keeps going, we could possibly see them go into space. In fact, I'd love to see an episode like that, where Stargate Command ends up coming into contact with Langara's version of an SG team who's going out into the galaxy to gain alien technology to, well, advance themselves and defend themselves from other threats. As I said, I think that would kind of make sense, and currently Earth has promised to protect them from any attack by the Aleutian Alliance, but I'd like to see maybe a story where they want to stand on their own 2 feet. Again, I just kind of like seeing this building up of nations, and I really think the Langarans show the best of that. Recently I did a video on the Telgalians, and I feel like them and the Langarians are almost opposites to one another. While Tegalis ended up destroying itself because its people couldn't put aside their differences, the Langarans did, and like I said, it feels like they're becoming a true interstellar nation. But what do you all think? Do you like the Langarans as much as I do? Or do you not like them at all? Leave your thoughts in the comments below and maybe leave a like and subscribe. And remember,
do you take us for idiots?